come to think of it, I'm not really sure there's that much difference between my best of nature writing and best of environmental writing of 2022. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Justin here. In this video, I want to go over my top 5 favorite environmental / conservation themed books that I read in the year of 2022. A couple of them did come out in that year, last year, so that's good, but a bunch of them, and some of my favorites, did not, including my number 1, which was actually like 20 years old. It's one of the older books. Well, I guess not one of the oldest books I read last year, but definitely one of the oldest ones out of this list for sure. And yes, I'm arbitrarily splitting like all my nature reads into, I guess this one's gonna be kind of the more conservation, environmental sort of issues kind of category. Then there's going to be kind of the more general nature writing, and then there's also going to be like one focused more on zoology, so like animals specifically, whether that's groups of animals or specific species or something like that. Yeah, it's fairly arbitrary, but I read so many good nature biology books that I didn't feel like I'd do enough justice unless I did like a top like 20 video or something ridiculous like that. But I got a few more best of videos coming up. Ancient history is going to be the next one based on some comments some of you guys left on my other videos. If there's another topic that you want me to do, write quickly. Let's see, I got like Roman history I got to do, the zoology one that I mentioned, nature writing, biographies, books published in 2022, stuff like that. So I got a whole bunch that, I gotta get going on actually filming these up. But yeah, let's just go ahead and get started before I ramble on forever and ever and ever. So we got 2 kind of runners up. I have my top 3, and I think in this video I actually think I have like my 1, 2, and 3. These 2 were just like runners up. First up, we got Nowhere Left to Go: How Climate Change is Driving Species to the Ends of the Earth by Benjamin von Brakel. This book is all about the elevator to extinction, which is why I picked it up in the first place, though that's actually only part of the book. For those who don't know, the elevator to extinction is as climate change is occurring and the planet is generally warming up for the most part. A lot of species that have very small ranges of habitat, for example, a lot of like alpine mountain type animals, only have a habitable zone at certain like altitudes and temperatures and stuff. But as the climate warms, they're forced to kind of move up or down the slopes, usually up, to seek kind of cooler temperatures. And generally, as you go up in altitude, there's less room. Like, if you have like a peak on a mountain here like this, the farther up you go, there's just generally less space for everyone to kind of go. Plus, also when you reach the top, you can't really go any further than that. But it also deals with a couple other issues that I had never actually really considered before. And a major thrust of the book is, while it's all fine and good to have like nature preservation, national parks, refuges, all that kind of good stuff where the animals are, the wildlife and biodiversity is fairly well protected as far as things go. If they have to move based on like a shifting climate, whether that's shifting temperatures, precipitation, whatever that happens to be, and they migrate literally out of the zone that they're kind of protected in, the zone or the refuge or whatever isn't going to change borders to kind of accommodate them. So if everyone leaves, if the populations leave those borders, they're not going to be protected anymore, and it's just going to be a whole mess. And that's actually sort of what's been going on. Like on average, I think it was like 11 miles northward per decade. The majority of land animals were just like naturally kind of migrating towards, and then in the ocean it was actually even substantially more. I think it was like in the 30s or 40s. Just how crazy some of the kind of natural migratory pattern, well, I guess not, it is natural, but kind of their responses to like the shifting climate and variables kind of going on in their ecosystems. So yeah, it's just a really good book kind of dealing with the nuts and bolts of that sort of, I guess, thing. And like I said, it was a topic I had never actually fully considered the ramifications of part of it, so really glad to have read it to learn more about that. Next up, we have Evergreen: Saving Big Forests to Save the Planet by John Reed and Thomas Lovejoy. This is always kind of interesting seeing a kind of collab book going on. But this book is all about the 5 major intact forests that are still relatively intact, and let's see, we got the taiga over the northern Eurasian landmass, and the boreal forest over the northern part of North America, and then we got the rainforest in South America, the Congo in Africa, and New Guinea, the rainforest of New Guinea, which is still largely intact. The main purpose of this book was to kind of demonstrate why these 5 forests are very important, to the world ecosystem, by being kind of largely intact. Kind of all the ecosystem services is usually what they're kind of called, what they were kind of doing for the different populations around them, for the global environment as a whole, things like that. What was interesting about this book is it kind of goes into like the nitty gritty of how people are actually going about protecting them and kind of conserving them, and kind of keeping them for posterity and stuff. Dealing with the local indigenous peoples around each forested area, as well as kind of like the national country level, and then even into the international level, literally going into like doing the whole like carbon credits thing and paying other countries basically just to kind of preserve them, and how that actually works, and why it doesn't work in some situations and why it does in others, and things like that. It's nothing I've actually like really read about before. Everyone's kind of like heard about carbon credits and kind of stuff like that, but kind of dealing at like kind of the, like I said, the international global level was kind of like an eye-opener on how that actually kind of goes down. And I probably should actually almost like pick up a physical copy of this book just so I could like reread that chapter and kind of get that like memorized, so I can like actually use them as like talking points and stuff a lot better. Everything's still kind of a little bit fuzzy with like kind of the math and that sort of stuff, but like I said, really interesting, and it's not a topic you read about a whole lot. Alright, so now let's go on to number 3. We have the tree line, and this is the one I wish I actually picked up too, because it's a topic kind of like I have a soft spot for. The Lost Forest, or excuse me, the Lost Forest, yeah, The Last Forest and the Future of Life on Earth by Ben Rollins, and this is all about kind of the northern boreal forest, and his definition of the boreal forest is essentially the taiga and the boreal kind of combined, like the the giant forest that kind of covers the Arctic, well, right below the Arctic Circle between Canada, Europe, and Russia. And living in like northern Maine, I'm kind of like almost on the edge of like the boreal forest, so definitely like when I do my like nature walks and stuff like behind my house and things, like it's probably the boreal forest is definitely kind of the closest I guess ecosystem like I could count it as, more so than a temperate forest. But anyways, what's cool about this book is Ben Rollins kind of goes to several different locations. Like I know he goes to Alaska, he goes to Siberia, he goes to Greenland, and I can't remember if it was Norway or Sweden. It was one of those two countries, but anyways, talking about all the different changes to the boreal forest that's kind of going on. For example, the tree line is generally shifting north, more northwards, kind of like with nowhere left to go. Even plants, as long as the climate conditions are favorable to them, will like kind of, obviously it's a little bit slower the plants because they have to kind of rely on like seed dispersal, things like that. You can't just like kind of get up and walk. But anyways, the tree line is generally moving north, kind of at a measurable pace over the past 100 years, and how that's actually affected a lot of different peoples. For example, I can't remember the reindeer herders in northern, I can't remember, maybe it was Finland. Can't remember if it was Finland, Norway, or Sweden. But anyways, like the indigenous reindeer herders of that region are having a rough time with it, and just because different species of plants are kind of invading. There's not as much snowfall as there used to be to kind of prevent different things from happening and stuff like that. So you get kind of a good picture of why, you always think, well, the boreal forest is probably the most intact super forest. You can kind of learn that in the other book as well, in Evergreen. But it still has like I said, it has a major impact with its changes, especially with things like methane releases and things as well, in the soil and ground and stuff like that. But like I said, I kind of wish I might get a secondhand copy of this one as well, just because like I said, I have a soft spot for boreal forest in general. Alright, I do have the next 2 books in physical format, so let's go on to number 4. We have The Sound of the Sea, Seashells and the Fate of the Oceans by Cynthia Barnett. Just look. I know my copy is like kind of banged up. I'm not quite sure like where I was going with it to get it kind of like that dirty and that sort of thing. But anyways, I thought the cover was like really awesome when I saw it in a bookstore one time, and then I put it off for like a year, and then I was like, no, I'm finally gonna get to it, and I did. I'm really happy that I did. Ostensibly, the book is all about seashells, and there is actually quite a lot to it for different. I want to say explorers, not explorers, but different. Naturalists who kind of got the whole seashell thing kind of going on, identifying them and cataloging them and stuff like that, and kind of the history of the sort of their uses and different people groups, stuff like that. It's just really fun learning about things like that. You learn all about different festivals, things in the Caribbean and stuff, where people utilize them in like really cool ways. Obviously to eat, but also for like other purposes as well. Like that sort of stuff is really fun. For those who don't know, I grew up in Florida, so I went to Daytona Beach like every weekend, like during the spring and summer, and I did a little bit of shell collecting and stuff. And the author talks a lot about like Sanibel Island, for example, and the kind of the seashell craze that kind of goes along there as well. And it is very interesting. And then the undercurrent of the entire work is also dealing with sort of how the ocean has been affected by tons of different things, becoming more acidic, and by becoming kind of warmer, more acidic, a lot of animals such as crustaceans and mollusks and stuff have a much harder time building shells in the first place, and also repairing their shells, like whenever they become damaged and stuff like that. So a lot of it, like I said, is kind of dealing with seashells, but there's a lot of kind of conservation stories kind of going into it. For example, like the Mars company, which is a really, the giant company that owns like half the candy in the world and stuff. I'm sure tons of other like food products and stuff, but how they have some like kind of secret, conservation programs that they fund around the world and stuff to kind of try to rebuild coral reefs and stuff like that. But anyways, really enjoyed this book. I think you guys will too, so definitely check this one out. All right. And lastly, before we go on to number one, thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, for sure, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of cool stuff. But if you want to support the channel, the best way is to check out my Etsy shop, where I sell signs like this, and some other nature ones, things like that. Kind of revamping it right now, but even just liking some of your favorite signs or designs or whatever, liking the shop, things like that, definitely help me a lot in the YouTube algorithm. If I can stand that up without knocking it over, which looks like it's not. Oh, there we go. All right, so let's go on to number one, and it's from an author that I knew was going to be really good, and this is my fourth book by Carl Safina, and it is Song for the Blue Ocean: Encounters Along the World's Coast and Beneath the Seas. Now, this was actually his very first book, and I can't remember which award he won from writing this one. Of course, it's not going to say, because this was obviously the first one that he won the award for. But I first read his Voyage of the Turtle, Becoming Wild, and Eye of the Albatross. And Eye of the Albatross I also read in 2022, and that was kind of, I like this one a little bit more, and I think it's just got a little more, I don't know, there's just a little more oomph to it, I suppose, I don't know. But they are both tremendous works, definitely 5 stars for each of them. Actually, I think all 4 of his books so far have been 5 stars, so I'm planning on reading his entire bibliography. I think it's like 8 or 9 books so far. But anyways, like I said, this was his first one written, I think, in the late 90s. And what Carl Safina does, he is an oceanologist, marine biologist, and he actually works at the international level, writing, helping kind of write treaties in fisheries science and advising on different quotas and things like that. I think, if I remember from his Voyage of the Sea Turtle, he helped design a hook that turtles, for people that do long lining, a hook that turtles can bite onto, but it won't snag them, essentially. And that became essentially an international law, things like that. And he has his own, I think, the Safina Foundation, which does a lot of kind of oceanographic research and stuff like that. So anyways, really cool guy. Definitely check out all his stuff, for sure. Anyways, this book is kind of broken into 3-ish parts. The first one dealing with kind of the tuna fishery and kind of going. What was really fun was it's in the Gulf of Maine. Like I said, I got a soft spot for Maine too. But he's talking with a Maine, not, I want to say bush pilot, but essentially a bush pilot that just flies around helping the tuna fishers find schools of tuna and stuff. But anyways, yeah, the first part kind of deals with, kind of the lives of tuna fishermen, like why they're doing it, things like that. But then it kind of goes into like the nitty gritty of like kind of, international politics where they're arguing over like quotas and stuff. And, some people that just know the fishery is being depleted, but they don't really care. They're in it for the short term. And then there's also some that actually do want kind of like steward the fishery because they know in the long term, if you have a fishery that's still there and viable and you can fish it, you're going to be able to like live off it. Whereas if you collapse it in a couple of years, you're going to be out of work and stuff like that. But anyways, I love Carl Safina because he always goes down to like the people who are actually working these jobs. Every book I've read, he either deals with researchers, for example, the ones living on the islands where the albatross rookeries are. Voyage of the Sea Turtle, he goes on like a bunch of fishing trips, that are like weeks on end, with different fishermen and how they're kind of trying to do their best to protect turtles and other birds and things like that. And the same thing in this one as well. The second part is dealing with the West Coast fisheries, the big one being kind of like the salmon runs and stuff out on the West Coast, West Pacific coast of North America. And he kind of deals with people, different like problems that dams are kind of causing, why, in some cases it's good to remove them, some cases you just like can't, things like that. Different conservation efforts of different people kind of working towards, good salmon fishery practices in those regions. And then the last one is all about he kind of goes with some researchers in Palau on like a really thriving coral reef. He goes on an adventure afterwards too that I don't want to give in too much, but it actually involves like tons of guns and crazy Banana Republic stuff kind of going on. But anyways, kind of the different research and kind of different obstacles that researchers have been experiencing, things like that, just trying to do what they do. But anyways, just really well written. His prose is magnificent. Like I said, he's literally down to earth and puts his boots on the ground wherever like the people that he's like the topic or people he's writing about, he joins them in pretty much all their kind of like adventures and going in the trenches with them, doing whatever, whether, like I said, that's tuna fishing or swordfish fishing, stuff like that. Anyways, really enjoy them. He's definitely in my top 5 authors of all time now, so definitely check that one out if you're going to check out a Carl Safina book. So there you have it. Those are my 5 favorite environmental kind of conservation type of works that I read in 2022. Let me know if you've read any, whether it was last year or even before that, whatever. Let me know of any, because I'm always on the lookout for good books on this time. I'm always on the lookout for good books in general, but yeah, for this video we'll go with the conservation topics for sure. Like I said, I'd be glad to talk to you about any of these titles in the comments below as well. And always remember, whether you're reading conservation books or not, read victoriously.